The rain had been falling for days. Thick curtains of water lashed the golden grasslands of the Soysambu Conservancy in Kenya, turning the once sun-baked earth into a vast, trembling sea of mud and flooded streams. Rivers broke their banks, small ponds grew into lakes, and the animals, so used to the rhythms of drought and storm, were pushed to their limits. Deep inside the heart of the reserve, a small miracle was fighting for its life. Her name was Nuru, light in Swahili, a newborn giraffe with spindly legs and wide, bewildered eyes. She had been born only a week earlier beneath the spreading branches of an ancient acacia tree. Her mother, Amani, had guarded her fiercely, leading her through the tall grasses and teaching her to flick away biting insects with her tufted tail. But when the rain had come, faster and heavier than any in living memory, it had swallowed everything: the dry trails, the sheltering trees, even the places where the giraffes foraged. In the chaos, separated from the rest of their tower, Amani and little Nuru had found themselves stranded on a rapidly shrinking island of high ground. All around them, brown floodwater churned, carrying branches, logs, and the detritus of the broken land. The real danger wasn't just the water. Crocodiles, normally confined to the reserve's lakes, now swam freely across the plains, drawn by the scent of trapped, panicked prey. Already, in the distance, Amani could smell the sharp, sour fear of other animals, the bleats of distressed antelopes, the frantic splashing of warthogs trying to swim. And every so often, a ripple would move against the current, silent and sinister. Amani kept Nuru close, nudging her with her strong nose whenever the calf wobbled too close to the edge of their muddy refuge. But her heart was pounding with a terrible truth: if the water rose any higher, there would be no ground left to stand on. Miles away, at the edge of the reserve headquarters, the conservationists were fighting their own battle. James Kamani, the head ranger, stared grimly at the satellite images flickering on the screen inside the mobile command trailer. It was worse than anyone had thought. Entire sectors of the conservancy were underwater. Elephants had retreated to the few surviving hills. Herds of zebras were marooned on patches of high ground. Predators were acting strangely, confused, displaced, dangerous. And then came the radio call. "James, you need to see this." It was Zara Otieno, the young field biologist who had been monitoring the giraffe populations. She had been out with a drone earlier in the morning, trying to map the flooded areas. Now she burst into the trailer, rain dripping from her jacket, her boots caked in mud. Without a word, she thrust a tablet into his hands. The drone footage was grainy, blurred slightly by the storm, but it was clear enough. A giraffe calf, barely able to stand, stranded on an island no larger than a tennis court. A taller adult, the mother, paced anxiously nearby. The camera panned slightly, and James' stomach dropped. In the water, just beyond the island, the unmistakable ridged back of a crocodile moved through the flood like a living log. "They won last the night," Zara said, her voice low. James cursed under his breath. "We have to get them out of there." Zara looked at him, eyebrows raised. "How? Boats?" James nodded grimly. "Boats. And whatever else we can find." The logistics were a nightmare. There were only 2 working boats at the reserve, small aluminum crafts used for patrolling Lake Elmantita, not for rescuing giraffes. Giraffes, even calves, were tall, fragile, and easily stressed. The wrong move could cause them to panic, injure themselves, or worse. They needed a plan. Fast. Within an hour, the team had assembled: James, Zara, and a few seasoned rangers, including Musa, the boat operator with nerves of steel, and Dr. Emily Travers, a British veterinarian who had been volunteering at the reserve for 6 months and had experience working with giraffes in captivity. They gathered around a map laid out on the table, weighted down with rocks to keep it from blowing away in the storm. "We approach from the leeward side," James said, pointing. "The current is slower there. We need a way to secure her gently," Dr. Travers added. "A net, maybe. Ropes to keep her stable. We can't sedate her, not in this weather, not without risk." "And the mother?" Zara asked. James hesitated. That was the most dangerous part. A giraffe defending its calf could kick with enough force to shatter a man's ribs. And Amani, judging by the footage, was already terrified. "We'll have to separate them carefully." Calmly, Dr. Travers said. If we move slowly enough, maybe we can guide the mother into shallow water while we secure the calf. It was a gamble, but it was the only shot they had. By late afternoon, the team was loading the boats. They brought nets, ropes, padded slings, and emergency medical supplies. A storm lamp to work by when the light failed. James's radio crackled with updates from the other rangers. More flooding, more animals in distress. Focus, he told himself. One life at a time. By the time they reached the edge of the flood zone, the sky was a seething gray, and the water was filled with debris, branches, chunks of grass, the occasional tragic corpse of a drowned animal. The boats buzzed to life, their small motors struggling against the current. Nuru and Amani were still there, miraculously. But so were the crocodiles. 2, maybe 3, circling closer now. James's stomach twisted. "We don't have much time," Musa said, steering the lead boat through a snarl of floating branches. "We do this now, or we don't do it at all." The boats inched forward, engines cutting to a low murmur. James stood in the prow, net in hand, heart hammering. Rain lashed his face. Behind him, Zara whispered encouragement, her hand on the tranquilizer gun, just in case. Amani lifted her great head and spotted them. Her ears twitched, and she let out a deep, booming grunt, a sound of warning. Nuru, sensing the tension, stumbled against her mother's legs. Closer, closer. Every second felt like a lifetime. Then, without warning, one of the crocodiles surged, a dark shape slicing through the water toward the island. James shouted. Musa gunned the motor. The boat leapt forward. The rescue had begun, and there would be no turning back. The boat slammed against a submerged branch, jolting James hard enough to nearly knock the net from his hands. Musa fought the motor, weaving between floating debris as they raced toward the island. The crocodile was faster. In the gray, heaving water, the beast looked massive, easily a 4-meter male, slicing toward the tiny calf with grim purpose. Its ridged tail thrashed, sending waves ahead of it like ripples from a torpedo. Nuru cried out, a high, panicked bleat, and tried to scramble backward up the muddy island. Amani roared, an explosive grunt that shook droplets from her soaked coat. She stamped her hooves, kicking up clumps of wet earth, but the island was too small. There was nowhere to run. Hold her off, James barked. Zara, already moving, shouldered the tranquilizer rifle. She had only one dart loaded, enough to deter, not kill. She took aim through the rain. A heartbeat. Then the dart flew. It struck the crocodile just behind the jaw, sinking deep. The beast thrashed violently, throwing up a wall of water. But it veered sideways, confused, slowing its advance. Go, James roared. Musa rammed the boat onto the flooded edge of the island. James and Zara leapt out into knee-deep, swirling water. The current nearly knocked James off his feet. Amani turned to face them, legs spread in a defensive stance. Her nostrils flared, her muscles bunched. One wrong move, and she could flatten them both. Easy, girl, James murmured, spreading his arms, speaking in the low, rhythmic tones the rangers used to calm wild animals. We're here to help. Behind him, Zara struggled to unload the sling and ropes. The boat rocked violently, the other crocodiles were circling. Dr. Travers called over the radio, her voice crackling. We're bringing the second boat. Hold them back. James barely heard her. His whole world narrowed to the frantic drumbeat of rain, the tremble of the calf, and the furious, towering mother standing between them. Plan B, Zara hissed. James nodded grimly. They would have to distract Amani, just for a few seconds. Zara picked up a pole from the boat, long, with a bright orange flag tied at the end, and slowly, carefully, waved it in the air. Amani's eyes locked onto the movement. Her ears twitched. She took one step forward, hesitating. It was enough. James darted sideways, splashing up the muddy incline. He threw the net wide over Nuru, who let out a bleat of terror but was too exhausted to struggle much. The calf's legs folded awkwardly beneath her as James and Zara tightened the edges of the net, securing her gently but firmly. Lift, Zara gasped. Together, muscles straining, they hoisted Nuru into the padded sling. Amani saw. Her protective instincts roared back to life. With a guttural grunt, she lunged, head lowered, hooves pounding the wet earth. Move, James shouted. They stumbled down the slippery bank, dragging the sling between them. Musa revved the motor. The boat rocked dangerously as they hauled Nuru aboard, bundling her into the bottom where thick blankets and padding waited. Amani reached the water's edge, but she stopped there, hooves splashing in the shallows, staring with wide, furious eyes. Nuru's secure, James yelled into the radio. The second boat arrived, weaving past the half-drugged crocodile and forming a shield between the mother giraffe and the rescuers. For a moment, everything froze. Amani stood there, rain slicking her spotted coat, nostrils flaring. Nuru let out a soft, pleading cry from the boat. It broke the mother's heart. With an agonized moan, Amani turned, circling the island, pacing frantically but not daring to plunge after the humans. "We can still save her," Zara said. "We just need to get her to higher ground." "Lead the way," James said, voice hoarse. Musa steered the first boat slowly, careful not to jostle the calf. The second boat, piloted by Dr. Travers, followed close behind. The crocodiles, disoriented and sluggish from the dart and the engine's noise, kept their distance, for now. The team had mapped a route earlier, a narrow channel of slightly higher ground where the current wasn't as strong. It would take them to one of the rocky ridges rising above the floodwaters, a natural refuge for displaced animals. But the journey was hellish. Debris clotted the waterway. Twice, they had to stop and clear a path, pushing logs aside with poles. The rain intensified, a blinding wall that turned the world into a gray, churning nightmare. In the bottom of the boat, Nuru shivered, eyes wide with terror. Zara wrapped a tarp loosely around her to keep her warm, whispering nonsense words of comfort. "It's okay, little one," she murmured. "You're safe now." James kept checking the horizon, scanning for signs of more crocodiles, or worse, hippos, who could be territorial and aggressive in floodwaters. The minutes dragged like hours. At last, through the rain, the rocky ridge came into view, a long, narrow finger of stone poking above the flood like a drowning man's hand. Other animals had already gathered there, baboons, impalas, even a few dazed warthogs. "Almost there," Musa said, voice tight with exhaustion. They nosed the boat up against the rocks. James and Zara climbed out, pulling the sling between them. Their boots slipped on the wet stone. Every muscle screamed with effort. Together, they laid Nuru gently on the dry, solid ground. The calf lay still for a moment, blinking up at them. Then, slowly, she struggled to her feet, wobbly but upright. Cheers broke from the team. James sagged against a boulder, wiping rain and sweat from his eyes. Zara laughed, a short, sharp sound edged with relief. But it wasn't over yet. In the distance, across the water, a shadow moved. Amani. She was swimming, actually swimming, through the flood, her head and neck craned high above the current. James' breath caught. "I'll be damned," Musa whispered. The mother giraffe, against all odds, was coming for her calf. The team watched in stunned silence. Amani fought the current with raw, desperate strength, her long legs kicking through the floodwaters, her neck stretched forward like a banner of hope. Each stroke brought her closer, but the river pulled at her, sucking at her hooves, dragging at her body. "She's not going to make it," Dr. Travers said, her voice tight. "She has to," Zara whispered. James was already moving. He grabbed one of the long rescue poles from the boat and sprinted to the water's edge. Musa and another ranger followed, throwing a rope into the water, a lifeline, if she could reach it. "Come on, girl," James urged under his breath. "Come on." The flood was treacherous. Debris swirled past, some of it striking the struggling giraffe. Twice, Amani faltered, nearly slipping under. Each time, she found her footing again, driven by something deeper than fear, the impossible pull of her newborn calf. Nuru, standing unsteadily on the rocks, bleated a high, plaintive cry. It pierced the storm like an arrow. Amani heard. With a last, shuddering surge, she thrust herself toward the ridge. Her hooves found the rocky slope. She scrambled upward, water pouring off her in rivulets. James and Musa rushed forward, guiding her with careful motions, keeping the pole between them and her hooves. But Amani had no interest in the humans. Her eyes, wide, wild, shining, were locked on Nuru. The calf wobbled forward. For a heartbeat, everyone froze, the storm around them fading to a whisper. Then Nuru pressed her small, soaked body against her mother's legs. Amani bent her long neck low, wrapping it around the calf in a fierce, protective embrace. A roar of relief and joy rose from the team. Even Musa, usually stoic as a rock, let out a whoop and slapped James on the back. "They made it," Zara said, blinking tears from her eyes. They actually made it. Mother and calf stood together in the rain, framed against the bruised sky, their bodies touching, hearts beating as one. It should have ended there. But nature, as always, had one more trial to give. Behind them, from the swirling gray waters, more shadows emerged, crocodiles, drawn by the noise, by the scent of struggling animals. Not just one or two now, but a half-dozen. Big ones. Hungry. Incoming. Musa shouted. The team sprang into action. The second boat, still floating nearby, gunned its motor, weaving between the predators and the rocky outcrop. Zara grabbed flares from the supply box and lit one, the red smoke billowing in the rain. She waved it high, the angry hiss and brightness startling the crocodiles into hesitation. James and Musa shouted, throwing rocks into the water, creating splashes to confuse the hunters. For a few tense minutes, it was a standoff, man against beast, storm against will. Finally, with a collective lurch, the crocodiles turned away, slipping back into the deeper currents, seeking easier prey. The ridge was safe. For now. James slumped against a boulder, adrenaline crashing down like a wave. Across the rocks, Amani nuzzled Nuru, her body shielding the calf from the wind and rain. The storm began to ease, the thunder rumbling away into the distance. The clouds broke just enough for a shaft of late afternoon light to pierce through, a single golden beam falling across the soaked plain. It touched Amani and Nuru first, turning their wet coats to burnished gold. It looked like a blessing. The rescue team gathered their supplies, tending to minor cuts and bruises. Zara checked on the other animals sheltering on the ridge, the baboons, the impalas, offering what help she could. Dr. Travers approached James, brushing mud from her face. "We need to stay with them overnight," she said, nodding toward the giraffes. "Make sure they recover. Make sure the waters keep receding." James nodded. "We camp here. We'll protect them." And so, as darkness fell, the rangers built a small, careful camp on the ridge. They lit a sheltered fire, hung tarps against the rain, and took turns keeping watch. Amani never strayed far from Nuru's side. All night long, under the sullen flicker of lightning on the horizon, mother and calf stood together, survivors, warriors, proof that even in the fiercest storm, love could be a force stronger than fear. By morning, the waters had begun to pull back, leaving behind a battered but breathing landscape. The rescue boats, the ridge, the battered animals, they would all carry the scars of the flood. But they had endured. James stood on the highest rock, watching the sunrise blaze across the plains. He turned to Zara, who stood beside him, her hair tangled by the wind, her eyes bright. "Think she'll stay?" Zara asked, nodding toward Amani. "For a while," James said. "Long enough." Below them, Nuru stumbled after her mother, stronger already, curious about the world she had almost lost. Amani paused, lifting her head to gaze back at the humans, just for a moment. Then, with a flick of her tail, she led her calf onward, toward higher ground, toward life. And the storm, at last, was over.